All right, we have made it to part 5 of how to make a non-stretch cloth cover for your dress form. And I feel like this is my big reveal. I'm going to show you the fabric that I'm going to be using. I'm very excited about it. And honestly, I don't know if it's going to be practical, but I thought I would try it because it's got some slide to it and it's really pretty and it's quilted. So there's a layer of batting between the top and the backing of this. So it'll smooth out any of my little lumps and bumps I have going on in my DittoForm when I shrunk her down to size. Now, just a little note on that. If you're watching this and you have a DittoForm and you lost weight, or you're thinking about getting a DittoForm but you're worried what would happen if you lost weight, just know that you can shrink it down. But don't just do it on your own. Contact Carol and she'll at DittoForm and she'll help you. I had a Zoom meeting with her and she showed me how to do it. So don't just try to shrink it yourself, but just know if you're wondering about that, it is possible to shrink your DittoForm down. I lost 12 pounds since I got this, since my body scan, so I really had to shrink down my measurements on here. Let me show you the fabric. Isn't it pretty? It's so soft and it's slippery. It's got some slide to it, so I think it'll be a good cover for my DittoForm. And I think things will be able to go on and off of it really easily, and I think it'll look nice. All right, so the first step in to use this fabric is to determine which way the nap is going. And if I'm honest, I think it might feel better if I pet it down this way slightly more than doing it this way, but I don't feel that roughed up feel in the opposite direction. So I think it'll be nice coming and going when I'm pulling garments on and off of it. We'll start with the side front pieces. And I think what I'll do is I'll just line up the circle. So that's what you see on the side over here. So let's put it like this. And then when I'll use this piece, I'll flip it over and I'll mirror image it. That's what I'll do. So I think I'm gonna have it be something like this. All right, and I'm gonna cut that out. Just gonna go for it. I don't want to overthink things here. If this fabric doesn't work out, I'll make it out of something else. But I saw this and I fell in love with it, so we're going to try it. All right, so now that we have that piece, so like I said, I think I have enough fabric to fussy cut it. But see, I can line up my second piece so it matches. All right. All right, so that'll give us our 2 side front pieces. Now let's do our center front pieces. And I think it'd be kind of cool if in the center front, if we put the center front like right in the middle of these medallions. I think that'd be kind of cool. So I am going to line up my stitching line with the center of these medallions. I think I'll do that. All right, so can everybody see what I'm doing? I'm using the print here to line up with what's underneath. Okay. All right, so here's my front. Okay, so when those are sewn together, it'll look like that. That's kind of cool. I think that's going to be cool. All right, so those are all set. I'm going to cut these pieces out next. I'm going to try to get the big pieces first, and then I'll worry about the little pieces. So I'm moving to the lower side front. So I want to try to fit this in a yard of fabric. I only bought a yard. All right. So now I'm just going to put this piece right next to it, and I think it'll work out. Okay, so all the really big pieces are done now. So now let me go back and do my center back piece over here. And I think I'll just do it like this. We'll just try it. I think the overall look of it's going to be good. I'm not going to be too crazy about the quilted design. I mean, I'll try to match it as much as possible, but I'm going to put the other back piece over here. Let's see if we can match it. I think we'll be able to. Yeah, see, that'll match. All right, so I've got my two center back. Okay, right here I'm going to cut out the lower side back piece. Okay. All right, and then I'm just going to flip it over and cut out the other piece. I'm not going to match these because I think I'm running out of fabric. So I'm just going to cut this piece out right next to it. So this piece is going to be right here. And then this piece, I'm just going to put right here. Again, it's not going to match, but I want to make sure I get all the pieces I need out of this. Okay, so here are my side back pieces. All right, so now I only have these two little pieces left, and I should be able to squeak it out of here. All right, I've cut all my pieces, and the way this is going to work is we're going to sew together the entire front and the entire back. Then we're going to sew one shoulder seam and one side seam. Then we're going to have to put it on the dress form and basically whip stitch the opposite side seam shut by hand. And it may work out actually that I could do both of the shoulder seams. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my back pieces and put them aside so nothing gets confused. Now for the front, that's going to be the more, again, a little bit more of a high maintenance pieces to sew together, because remember we have to mark the notches and gather. So I'm going to turn these upside down, or wrong side face up, and I'm going to use a pencil to mark my notches. So I know I need to gather from here to here. All right, so we'll make sure we mark that on this one too. All right, so I've got my notches there. And then we also need to mark the notches that we're actually going to sew the side front pieces to. So let me just mark that. I just want to say, if you can hear the rain in the background, I apologize. It is pouring right now, and I can hear it in my window. All right, so I've marked my notches, and it's time to get our sewing machine so we can sew these together. All right, I have my machine set up for a regular straight stitch. I have white all-purpose thread in my machine. First thing I'm going to do actually is run my gathering stitches on my on my side front pieces. So let's do that first. All right, so if you remember, I like to do 2 rows of gathering stitches, one along the edge and one inside, or on the inside of the seam. So I'm going to put my stitch length at 4. So it's a short basting stitch. And I'm just going to stitch along. I'm not going to use the scissors because I want tails so I can pull the threads. So I got 1, and then I'm going to do a second row in here, maybe 3/4 of an inch away from the edge. All right, and then I'm going to repeat that for the other side. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my right sides together. I'm going to match my notches. So these two are going to go together. And I'm going to put a pin at the bottom notch, a pin at the shoulder, and a pin at the top notch over here. All right, so here you can see this is the part I need to gather in to the center front. So I am going to pull these 2 bobbin threads, and I'm just going to gently pet the fabric along my stitching until it fits. And I'll do it from the top and the bottom. All right, so that fits. Let me snug it a little bit more. I mean, the goal is for this to fit without seeing any of the gathers, and I think the gathers are just going to blend right in and you won't see them, but see how nice that is? So that's all set. I'll put one more pin over here, and then I think what I'll do is I'll just get both of these ready. So I'll pin, all right, and then again I'm just going to pull up the bobbin thread to get that to fit. Like that. All right, so now let's sew these front pieces together. All right, so keeping all our preparation in mind, I'm going to be real careful and I'm going to sew at a 1/2 inch. Because I don't want all my good measuring to go to waste. And I'm going to make my stitch length shorter. So I think I'm going to go to like 2.5 or maybe 2.7. I want a relatively short stitch here. I am going to take the pins out as I come to them. See how that looks. See, that looks lovely. You can't even see that there were gathers in there. All right, so there's 1/2. Let's do the other half. All right. All right, so this is exciting. I think what I'm going to do now is I'm going to just put my right sides together and sew my center front seam too. I'm not pinning this because it's one straight seam. All right, so let's do our lower front pieces next. We'll do the entire front and then we'll do the entire back. So I want to make sure I have these facing right. So they're going to go together like this. Okay. And then this one will go like this. All right, so let's sew these. All right, and let's do the other one. All right, so now I can sew my center fronts together. All right, so I did a pretty good job matching the print, even though I hadn't intended to do that. The next step is I'm going to pin the top piece to the bottom piece, or the upper bodice to the lower bodice. And the important thing here is I want to make sure that I'm matching my seams really, really well. So to do that, I'm going to start about 1 inch from the edge, and I'm going to put a pin across the seam like this. Okay, so that's where they're matching, see? And that pin is not going to come out as I sew because it's far enough away from the presser foot. So see, I'm matching there, and then I'm going to pin down the seam allowances. So they hang flat. So it's almost like I've got a double protection here. I'm going to do the same thing on the center seam. I'm going to pin it way down here where it's matching. And I'm going to check it. Oh yeah, see, that's a little off. Okay, so that's matching. And then I'm going to pin my seam allowances down. Okay, and then I'm going to do my last one, my opposite princess seam. All right, so now we're going to sew the empire waist seam. I've got everything nice and pinned. I'm going to put a few pins along the side, front, upper and lower pieces just to keep everything nice and straight. All right, so let's sew this together. When I get to the seams, I'm going to just lift my presser foot and make sure, you know, everything is staying put. All right, I'm almost to the end. All right, so those match pretty well. I'm happy with that. All right, so the front cover is sewn. I'm going to hop off and sew the back pieces together. I'm going to do it the exact same way, and I will come back and show you the next step. So go ahead and sew your back pieces together, and I'll see you really soon. Okay, so here is my front and back. I'm excited. I am going to pin my shoulder seams next, and I think we'll be able to do both shoulder seams on the sewing machine. If not, you're going to know before you sew together yours. So just hang with me here for a second, and I'm going to try to do as much of it on the machine as I can. So shoulder seams are first, or pin these seam allowances open. All right, so let's go to the machine and sew those. All right, and let's sew the second one. The next step is we're gonna sew a 1/2 inch around the neckline and armhole edges, because we're gonna tuck those under once we have it on the dress form. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna start somewhere on my neckline, and we wanna do our 1/2 inch, and as we go, we're gonna sew these seams open too. And this will give us a guide to help us turn the edges under. It's kind of like stay stitching. All right, so I'm just going to overlap my start point and cut that. All right. So I've got that, and I'm also going to do the same thing to the armhole. So I'm going to start on one side of my armhole. And again, we're going to press these open. Okay, let's do the other armhole. Before we sew any of the side seams, I think what we need to do is try it on and see how we did. So let's do that next. All right, so I've pinned my cover to my dress form, and there is a bunch of extra room in it. I think this fabric has a little bit more give than the muslin. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin out equally on the sides. You remember, the goal for me is to create a cover that I can use to design other things with and try things on. So I need to have my straight side seams, and I need this cover to be fairly snug. So the way it's looking, I'm going to pull out, or I am going to sew my side seam at 1.25 inches. Okay, so I'm pulling out a bunch of extra, and you can see here I've pinned it out. Okay, and that's not affecting my other style lines. So it's always good to do a final test, because you know the fabric that you decide to make your cover out of might have more give than the muslin you use to drape the pieces. So all right, so because I'm using such a large seam allowance, I'm going to measure from my needle, and I put a piece of tape here. That's 1.5 inches. I'm going to go with that for my seam allowance, because I think that'll make it nice and snug. All right, so let's line this up. And let's sew this at 1.5 inches. Oops, sizing didn't match up. All right, let's try this on and see if this worked. Anna, are you hovering?
What?
Are you hovering?
No. I'm going to dinner now.
Okay, have fun.
Yeah, I'm just getting myself ready. Too bad I don't have a card.
What?
I have a card.
I don't think he's gonna care. All right, so I'm happy with the way this is fitting, except this shoulder is doing something funny. It's almost like I need to pick this shoulder up. Remember, I only draped half of it. So I'm gonna just sew in this shoulder about 1/2 inch deeper up at the armhole. But on the shoulder that I draped, it fits perfectly. So there is a little bit of asymmetry in my shoulder that I didn't notice. So we're gonna go ahead and just sew this in a little bit deeper on the shoulder seam here. And then the next step is gonna be to hand sew this cover shut. All right, I want to keep track of it. It's this shoulder here that needs to be sewn in a little bit deeper. And the sad thing for me is I already sewed the seam allowance flat, so I have to take that apart. All right, so I'm just going to sew about a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to blend to 0. All right, I'm also going to trim it back down to a 1/2 inch. Let's just check the fit of the shoulder now that I sewed it. All right, so you can see the fit of the shoulder is much nicer now. So I have 2 nice shoulders. After I finished fixing the shoulder, I decided to go back in and top stitch all the seam allowances flat. Initially, I wasn't going to do that because I didn't want to have 3 seam lines trailing each of my style lines, but I think it makes it a little bit flatter and a little bit nicer. So I'm going to deal with the fact that I have all of these lines now. All right, let's take a peek at the inside of the cover. Okay, so you can see that everything is now top stitched, laying flat. And, you know, depending on the fabric you're using, you may decide that you want to, you know, sew your seam allowances down. You know, that's up to you. I think because I have batting and it's a little bit of a, you know, a loftier fabric, I just wanted to nail those down. These are the pins that I use to sew with. They're silk pins and they bend very easily if you try to use them in your dress form. And I know that because I've been doing that. So you can see they're bent and a lot of them are ruined. So what you really want to be using when you're draping or, you know, pinning anything into your dress form is you want to get yourself some of these flat head pins. They're steel. They're a little bit heavier than the silk pins, but they don't bend. And I think shorter is better when you're working on a dress form too. So these pins right here are what I'm going to use to pin the side seam shut. All right, so let's get our girl dressed up in her fancy new cover. All right, so you can see that with the top stitch seams, I think everything just lays really nicely. So I'm just going to fuss with it a little bit to get the center seam in the center. And the neckline, everything lined up nice and even. And then here's what we're going to do. We're going to deal with this opening now. And what I'm going to do to start is I'm going to take a couple of these pins and I'm going to pull the back cover, you know, over the side seam here. And I'm going to just pin it flat into the dress form. And I'm lining up my impure waist seam. Okay, so I'm just going to pin it. Like this. You know, nice and flat. I really only need 3 pins for this section, for this part. So okay, but you can see how nice those little short pins just dig right in. Okay, so I've pinned this forward. Then I'm going to take the front, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold the edge under that 1.5 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to pull it towards the back, and then I'm going to pin the folded edge down. So I'm going to do it at the bottom edge first. And then I'm going to do it at the top edge, you know, at the underarm. And then I'll fill in, you know, I'll pin through the middle. Okay, so I'm going to just pin that there. And then I'm going to pin the impure waist across. And then I'm just going to continue pinning this until I have it laying nice and flat. Working with these pins allows me to just, fuss with it and get it to lay exactly perfectly. And then after I play with it for a while and work with it, if I'm happy with this cover, I'm just going to whip stitch it shut, like right on, like sew it right onto the dress form. But for now, these pins are going to work out great. All right, so you can see I have it nicely pinned, and that lays nice and flat. Let me give it a twirl so you can see. Okay, all right, so there's my cover. I'm super excited about it. I just want to share with you that when I was planning this video, I thought, oh, I'm just going to make this real quick how to sew a cover video for you guys, and it ended up to be an epic 5-part series because there's a lot of steps. So if you're, if you've joined me on this adventure and you have questions about, putting your cover together, any little fitting things that happen to come up, please, post your questions and I'll help you. And just keep in mind that this version of draping isn't accounting for any ease. So this is just like get it on there and get it snug. So if you have questions about that, please, let me know. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the little bell, because then you'll get notified every time I upload a new exciting video. So I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. I will see you next week on Tuesday for another Fit Tip Tuesday.